Okay, perfect. Again, my name is Jason Hafman. I'm the outreach manager over at Project Home. I started out here on our weatherization crews, was doing that for 3.5 years, working with energy efficiency upgrades in people's homes, and then transitioned into this role where, again, I've worked a lot with volunteers, and it really helped me get into more of these type of landscaping projects and projects to help people keep water out of their houses. It's a really common thing. So tonight's program is all about that, strategies to prevent that basement flooding. And so far we've been pretty lucky with the weather, but um, you know, it's coming. It'll change on us soon, and then we've got to be careful about where we go next. So let's see. I had my screen share working, and now it doesn't like me. So hang on one second. Apologize for that. There we go. Okay, we're not frozen anymore. Tonight's program is sponsored by these fine sponsors: McFarland State Bank, MG&E, and Spectrum. Without them, we couldn't bring these classes to you for free, so we always thank our sponsors for the opportunity. Water in basements. It's a really common issue. We know that. It's often caused by improper backfill or a lack of maintenance. Those are the two primary causes. The thing with soil is if you ever disturb compacted soil, it's very likely that the settling will occur. And so it's really important at least twice a year to check your soil level around your home. So if you haven't done it yet, walk the entire perimeter of your house, because even one small area that has an issue could result in water in the intrusion in the basement. But I like to do that in the spring and the fall. Every spring and fall, just kind of check that for maintenance. You're looking for anything that is negatively graded, so slanting back towards the house, or even level, because water can pool and build up in that spot if it gets really saturated, and then eventually run back towards the foundation and end up where you don't want it to. So those are the things to look for. As I said, it's really prevalent and common. We also know that 96% of the water problems are due to poor surface control runoff of roof and surface runoff. So if we're not controlling the rainwater that hits our roof and it also comes through our gutters, and then also hits the ground, that's the biggest culprit. That happens all the time. And so a lot of the reasons are clogged gutters, detached gutters or downspouts, like you see in this photo, where if the water came down this downspout, it's all going to dump right next to the foundation right there. And then, or a negative grade to the foundation. So there's some pretty major issues. Water is actually the most damaging force and most commonly common force to cause damage to buildings. You can cause damage to your home and belongings if you get water in the house. If you haven't had this happen before, yay. But if you have, you've experienced some of this stuff. Repeat or reoccurring intrusion can result in mold and bacteria growth. Conditions can also, if the wood stays moist, certain bugs will come in that damage wood, like powder post beetles or carpenter ant infestations. And then if it happens enough, you can also have damage to the framing, rot or rust if it's metal framing, but it can rot the wood too. If there's improper cleanup or a recurring issue, it also creates these unhealthy living conditions in homes, which can cause respiratory illness, can make people sick in other ways, or make them more sick if they already had compromised immune systems, things like that. So it is really, really a big problem if this happens in your house. So here's kind of an extreme example of settling, but I wanted to show you this first because it's real. This was, just to kind of give a quick backstory on this project, this was previously a backyard that had not been disturbed for quite a while. The homeowner did not have water in the basement before this. They added some finished space to the basement and created this entry. So it's actually a patio door. The right picture is the right side of the wall that was put next to stairs that lead down to this patio door, and the left picture is the left side of that. I probably should have taken a picture of the stairs too to give you a better reference, but I didn't because I was looking at the settled soil. But the point here is, when I saw these photos, the homeowner called me and we were working with them on another project, and they said they're getting water in the basement. And when I took these photos and saw this, I thought, man, the contractor maybe didn't fill very far or didn't actually fill in very well. And the fill was actually up to the top of the concrete wall on both sides. And that's about a 10-inch drop in just over a year this occurred. So it can happen fast and it can be extreme. If you disturb soil, and you don't compact, as well as you should when you backfill, this stuff is really common. It can happen that extensively. Some less severe examples are ones like this. The picture on the right, it's almost flat, but again, flat is not what you want. You want a positive grade running away. In the picture on the left, you kind of see mounding, and that happens a lot, especially on an original fill. Sometimes the soil settles unevenly in spots, and that's kind of even a more common thing to look for, where maybe you don't have to do a complete fill all the way around, but you need areas that have settled more than others to really build up. So it continues because the water reaches dry soil and compacts. Even if the soil, the first 4 feet of soil or 2 feet of soil or whatever it is are saturated, there's dry soil underneath that. And if water's running to the foundation wall, it's going to run straight down, find some dry soil, compact that, and then all the soil above that sinks too. So we've got to keep water away from that foundation wall to stop the major settling. There are also some other landscapers other than yourselves that sometimes visit your house or your yard. This was at a house I was at too, where, we had some animals disturb the soil. And the problem with this one is they actually threw a bunch of that soil right up against the wood siding. It was starting to cause damage to the wood siding there. So if you ever, check your yard for this stuff too. If there is dirt, soil, mulch, material like that up against your siding, you need to move that away as quickly as you identify that. It's really important to prevent that damage. I see we have a question. Let me check it out. Will the slides be shared? Yes. We have a handout that will be sent to you after the presentation. So, and this will be being recorded too. So let me minimize that. Anyway, watch out for those animals. They'll disrupt your your landscaping sometimes. Here's the easiest way to address it, right? If we have a lot of exposed foundation that we can see, most homes built before the 80s have a lot of exposed foundation, and it's really simple in those cases. That's what we're going to start with, the simple fixes. It's getting the proper amount of soil, building up around the foundation, compacting the soil, sloping it away. There is a rule for that slope. You want it to be at least 1 inch per foot out 6 feet, extended out 6 feet from the foundation wall. So do I measure that exactly every time? No, but if I can see a good, strong, positive grade, I know I've at least achieved that. And so, as long as you can see a good positive grade, that is what you want, but that's the technical definition of what you want. The other thing I always advise, and I've worked with people on this too, is compact with a manual tamper, or if you have something mechanical for this, great, but a manual tamper works just fine. You can rent them if you don't want to buy one, and you want to do that regularly. So I've seen volunteer groups, and I've seen people do this where they might put down about 2 inches of soil and try to compact, and that never gets compacted the way it should be. Because I've revisited those homes after heavy rain or saturation, and then all of a sudden the grade that we built up has been minimized more than it should have been. So what I do and advise people to do is every time you dump down soil in one of these projects, compact it right away. So you pour a wheelbarrow load out, compact that whole wheel, spread it out, compact it, do the next one. Do that continually as you build up until you get to your top layer, where you might want to have just the top like 1/2 inch or 3/8 of an inch that's loose if you're putting in grass seed or something like that. Otherwise, if you're putting stone over it, if you're doing mulch even over it, you can compact right up to the top if you're not concerned about necessarily growing something right in that soil at that moment. But please compact as you go. Here's a good graphic from the home inspector I mentioned earlier. His name is Don Robbins, and I'll show you a photo of him too. But this is just kind of points out a couple of key things. So you see in this graphic, you have the original grade kind of sloping back to the foundation. You can see that topsoil was added to get the good slope away that you want. It's extended out 6 feet from the foundation, that slope, and then runs into the existing slope at that 6 foot mark. And the other key point is keeping soil or any material at least 2 inches below your lowest piece of siding. And that's whether it's wood siding, metal, vinyl, it does not matter. because behind the metal or vinyl, there's wood. So you want to make sure that you don't allow uh, moisture and moist soil to get up and penetrate and get water back splashing into that wood, because it's going to damage it. So the 2-inch rule is really important to remember. It also helps. It's also kind of a defense against termites. Now, obviously, we don't have a lot of issues with termites right here, but there has been more migration of termites north in the last handful of years. So it is something just to kind of keep an eye on. But that 2-inch rule is a good rule for many, many reasons, and you need to do that. Now, that also includes if you're putting mulch on top of your soil, then you've got to make sure your mulch is 2 inches down. So then you have to think of that in the process as well, of making sure you have your soil at a certain level, but then you can put some 2 inches of mulch on top of that. So then you'd actually wouldn't want your soil to be any closer than 4 inches within that lowest piece of siding. If you don't follow the 2-inch rule, this kind of stuff can happen. There's a lot of damage, a lot of paint peeling. This house, there was damage to the wood and the framing and the siding, and you actually have a nice hole right in the corner there for mice and other critters to get into the house and do damage. And so those are the things you got to watch out for. Again, 2-inch rule, 2 inches below the lowest piece of siding. One other thing I like to point out here is about front porches or stoops that are concrete. Really important, that's not your foundation wall. So some people kind of think, that's fine, not an area I need to worry about. But in a perfect world, they would never sink or settle because they have the footings in low enough and it's compacted underneath and there's a good base under it. But a lot of times we'll find, how many times have you seen a concrete porch or something like that that is cracked? And that's because ground below it has settled, has been saturated, has sunk below that base, and then it's sunk, and then the concrete has zero give, so it's going to crack if there's any of that settling that occurs underneath that concrete base. So build up against these two. Build your grade up against those so the water runs away and slopes away, and then you don't have that issue. Now, this is Don Robbins, the home inspector. He's also was a certified indoor air quality expert and a water and mold expert. So he was the person to learn from. I was very fortunate to be able to meet him about 7 years ago and learn a lot from him. And Don came, I don't know if he came up with this method or borrowed it, but I call it the Don Robbins method because he's the one that told me about it. But in cases where we don't have enough exposed foundation to build the soil up against, and this happens in a lot of homes that were built in the 70s or since then, where when the contractors did their backfill, they just didn't build houses as high. So there wasn't as much exposed foundation. And so they might have only left you a few inches after that initial fill. Well, then what would happen after the build is there would be uneven settling in between the yard and also by the house. So even though the grade was set up initially the right way, there may have been areas of the yard further out that didn't settle as much as areas that were right close to the house. And because of that, now all of a sudden you have this negative slope coming back to the house. So there are some options here. I mean, you could go and dig up your whole yard and get big machinery in there, but that's not what I would do and not what we're trying to do. We want to make this as simple for you and as inexpensive for you. And so Don had a really great method. He used treated landscape timbers or railroad ties to make his own mini retaining wall in areas where this was needed. And then you build up your ground against that and your slope, and that way you can actually get the soil level above the siding level without having soil touch the siding and cause you issues. And I'll show you what that looks like. Here's a great graphic. Now it's a little extreme because it shows, a big gap between where the soil level is against the foundation and where the soil had to be brought up to. But in most cases that we've done this, and I've done this on a number of projects, probably about 15 or more projects that volunteer groups and I have done this on, and it's worked really well. It doesn't look strange. Like this graphic makes it look a little strange because you have this gap. But a few key points here. When you put the landscape timbers in, you want to keep them about 6 inches away from the foundation wall and the siding. So you actually have to set them in place about 6 inches out from your house. And then you can raise them to the level you need to get the grade that you need. And then you can build all the soil up against those timbers and slope it away. Now there is this little gap, the 6-inch gap between where you put in that retaining wall and where your house is. You can fill that with some decorative materials, some landscape stones, something like that to dress it up. It actually looks pretty nice when you do that. And the amount of water that's going to get in that space, Don said, is not a concern. So I trust Don's word because he really knew what he was talking about. And we've done this successfully and not had any issues, like I said. So people that are, some people have asked that question, what about the water that gets in there? The amount of water that gets in there, because most people have overhangs and things like that, is not going to be an issue because it's going to be absorbed by the soil that's in that space. We want to get the bulk majority of the water. And that's what this allows us to do, is have that hit that slope, run away from the house, and stay out of our basement. Here is an example of what it looks like in real life, where we needed to do this kind of the front of the house and around the whole side of the home. And so you see, in this case, we used 6x6s. I like to use 6x6s. You can use a 4x6. I like to have the 6x piece wide down because it gives a really stable piece of lumber there. If you try to do a 4x4 or a 4x6 and have it the other direction, the narrow direction, then you need to anchor that some way so it's not going to wobble and be an issue for you. But the 6x6, when you put those things down, they're pretty much not going anywhere once you get them into a little bit of loose soil and then anchor them into place. So, and then you build up against that. In this case, we were doing grass seed, so we put some covering over the grass seed. We have our stone. We're about 6 inches away from the siding. Put our stone in there for decorative, and it looks pretty nice. There is an option. A landscaper I worked with on one project decided he wanted to really anchor these into place. So he got some rebar, some 2-foot pieces of rebar to stake through, drilled some holes every 3 feet or so, 2 to 3 feet, and then stake through the rebar into the ground to really anchor these landscaping timbers. But it's not necessary in most cases. If you're concerned about it not being stable, it's certainly an option. You just need to have the right size drill bit. And then they do sell 2-foot sections of rebar. That's plenty at pretty much anywhere you can buy those. They're not very expensive. And then you drill your hole, you stake it through, it goes into the ground. Again, call Digger's Hotline before you do any of that stuff, which I also have a slide on that too. But this is an option that you certainly can do if you want. But again, most cases we have not done this. That project, this is what it looked like when it was finished. So that's kind of the grading and landscaping piece. Are there any other specific questions about that? If not, I'll go on to the gutters and downspouts. That's the other big factor. Again, a lot of people don't think about the amount of water that hits our roof surface. That roof surface deflects a lot of water. And the water moves quickly because our roofs are sloped. So the gutters have to handle the volume. And when then you think about how the gutters are directed into just a couple of downspouts, most people have maybe, 2 in the front of their house, 2 in the back of their house. Sometimes it's only 1 on one side of the home on a long stretch. So that downspout is a lot of volume of water, especially when we get heavy rains. And so if those things aren't working properly, that's a huge issue and a big culprit for causing water to back up and get into the house. So we want to check our gutters and downspouts, make sure they're clean, make sure they're connected solidly and attached to the fascia or the house. Also, you can test on a nice day, like we have coming up this weekend. You can kind of test to make sure your gutters are working properly, that they're actually pitched correctly and going to the downspout instead of kind of building up in there where water might pool over and spill out. You can just do that by running a hose up on your roof for a little bit and just kind of watch how the water flows. If you see gutters kind of sagging in spots, there might be an opportunity to adjust that gutter or tighten it up in the sag spot by getting what's called a zip screw, or not a zip screw, excuse me, a speed screw hanger. So it's actually a gutter hanger that has the screw built into it. Those are available. They fit right into the inside lip of any gutter. And then the screw, you just screw it directly into the fascia board. You can screw right through the back of the gutter. And it'll tighten it up in the spots if it's sagging in any spots. So those are really nice hangers that a lot of people are using now. There are nails, and people have nailed gutters as well in the past. Those are still an option for you. But the speed screw hangers, I love them. I use them all the time to kind of shore up people's gutters if we need to. A key point about the downspout extensions, because I see a lot of them and it happens all the time where we see very short downspout extensions, because most of the time what happens when someone does a gutter job, uh, most gutter downspouts are sold in 10-foot sections. And so people will kind of use that 10-foot section on one downspout section. And as they drop it as far as they need to, based on the number of cuts they make and bend it around, they usually use what's left over of the 10 feet for that extension. And that's how sometimes you see just maybe a 2 or 3 foot extension. You want your downspout extensions to be a minimum of 4 feet, but as close to that 6-foot mark as you can get. So what I've done in a lot of cases, did this at my own house, was I bought some 10-foot sections of downspouts specifically, cut them in half, and then I had 2 5-foot extensions out of one downspout piece, sorry. And I just stuck that on my new downspouts. I now have the water far enough away where I want it to be. So that's a really good option. So let's say you've got, 4 downspouts in your house, buy 2 10-foot sections, cut them each in half, using a metal blade on a jigsaw, or you can use a hand saw that cuts through metal if you want. And then there you have it. You've got 4 downspout extensions at 5 feet. Also, gutter guards or gutter screens are really helpful for keeping debris out. They do have a little bit of water running over them at times, but it's pretty minimal. And for what it protects you from, having actually clogged downspouts or really have the water build up and be an issue, it's certainly well worth it. There are a couple options there. Some are a vinyl or PVC based, and they also have metal ones as well. It's kind of up to you what you want to go with there, but most of them are pretty easy to install as well. Don had a note about underground drainage pipes. I know a lot of us have those. He didn't really like them. He kind of advised, because he's seen cases where sometimes underground they have frozen in the spring, coming out of a winter thaw, and then we get a heavy rain early, and there's actually a block of ice in there, and it backs the whole thing up and cause people problems. So he just advised taking all of that above ground where you can at least see it and tell what's going on. But if you have underground drainage pipes and they've worked well for a long time, you don't necessarily need to follow that advice, but that was something that he advised for people, especially if they've had trouble with them in the past. Here's an example of those extensions. On the left, that one's too short. On the right, they actually added a flexible extension onto their other extension. The other extension was close to 4 feet. The customer wanted us to put that on there. Those flexible extensions are nice. They're not going to last forever. They do break down over time, but if you just want to throw those on, they're going to last you, a handful of years, and you can replace them at that point if you want. Or again, you can kind of switch to the metal by getting a downspout piece, 10-foot section, cut it in half and throw it on there. These are just some examples of people installing some of the PVC or the vinyl gutter screens. One quick point of advice there is you need to kind of loosen up the shingle at the bottom, and then you want to slide the gutter screen up underneath the shingle and then pull it back towards the gutter. You don't want to put the clipped end on the edge of the gutter and then try to bend it down and feed it under the shingle. Believe me, I did that the first time I tried to do it before I knew any of this stuff, and I fought it. I fought them over and over. It was very frustrating. It was also very unproductive, and I broke some of them. It was not a great experience. So that's the way to do it. Feed them up under the gutter or under the shingles, and then pull them back towards the gutter, and then snap them on the edge of the gutter. You can do them from the ladder, or you can do them from the roof, whichever you're more comfortable with. Again, single story, doing this on a single story home is pretty easy, not too bad. If it's up 2 stories and you're not comfortable being up that high, there might be, gutter companies can do that stuff. If you have work on your gutters done, tell them you want screens installed. There are other groups out there that might or companies out there that might be able to provide the service too. Unfortunately, this is not something we get to do all the time with most of our programs, although we have done it on some of them. So you can always ask if you're reaching out to us for service. Now, as we know, everything goes perfect on all our projects. It's all by the book, right? No, not at all. So sometimes there are some things to adjust to. this is a great example. This was a house where we were going to be doing some work. There was kind of this slant, just reoccurring water in the basement in this house over and over again, almost every time it rained. But there was this slant from the backyard that went from the garage side, or as we're looking at the picture, the left side to the right side. So water was running from the left side of the backyard to the right, and would then get to a trench between the properties and then run out to the street. So we had that going, but we also had a higher backyard that was running water back toward the house, which made the problem even worse. But what we were able to identify here, because it was so much higher in kind of the middle of the yard, about 10, 15 feet out, and we couldn't compensate for that. And we didn't want to make a big pool right in the middle. There was this trench that ran from left to right. That was about 3 to 4 feet out from the foundation. And so what we did was just built up soil in that 3-foot range or so from the house to that trench. And then we allowed the water from the backyard to also come to the trench. And then as it came to that trench, it kind of worked its way from the left to the right and then got away from the house. So here was an example where we couldn't necessarily follow the 6-foot rule unless we wanted to put in, stack 2 timbers, maybe 3, to get high enough to get above the mound that was 10, 15 feet away. That was an option, but not an option any of us loved. So we identified the trench. It was visible. It has to be visible and evident to you if you're looking for something like that. But if you can see that, use what's there. And it worked really, really well. And then we didn't create this big, huge, wall on the whole backside of the house when we didn't need to. So those kind of things too. You can test that too with a hose, with water running. All the best tests for how water is going to react is by using your hose and like seeing what it does when it hits some of these surfaces. That's why I always kind of advise that. But existing trenches sometimes are there and can be used. The other big thing is concrete pavers or paths, like driveways like this, or if there's a sidewalk really close, you can't get to that 6-foot mark because of that. In those cases, I would just make the slope a little more extreme so you get the water running away faster. So even though you can't go 6 feet away, you're making sure that water is getting away from the house quickly and is not going to come back towards the foundation. So what are we trying to do here? I mean, the impact really is preventing the water damage to the house, eliminating those unhealthy living conditions like we talked about, avoiding those pests and the ones that will damage our home, and then just preventing future repairs down the road. So that's really what we're trying to do. And in the process, we're protecting our house, whether it's something that's going to stay in the family or it's something that we want to sell down the road, or it's something we're going to live in for the next 30 years. We're just being good homeowners and taking care of those things. And it's good for your health. There's so many issues with water getting into homes and creating bad health situations. So I'm going to get into this next. There is all this information here for sure, and a lot of the main points, aside from maybe some of the examples previously, will be in the handout that'll be sent to you. But if you're interested in doing this, it is easier with a few extra hands. I will say that, but it's not impossible. You can do this yourself. You can do this with, one other person. It's something that you don't have to do all in one day, or, it's something that you can take your time with if you need to do it right. But it is doable. And there are some great places to get bulk soil orders and landscape materials from. I'll get a list of those for you too. But here's how you estimate the soil you need. You want to measure or slightly overestimate how many inches you need to raise the soil at the foundation wall. So you kind of have to look at it. Most of the time, the majority of homes I've gone to and the majority of homes I've evaluated, you're generally bringing material out 3 or 4 feet away from the house. Because usually at about that 4-foot mark, we run into a good existing slope that continues on, or a good point. So most of the time we're only adding soil from, the 0 point to the 4-foot point. And you can get like a 2x4 if you want to kind of test um, how high you need to go and kind of put that up against the foundation wall. And then just make sure you get a good positive grade on it, and then mark that and then measure. And then you'll know how high you need to raise at the foundation wall. And you know that at the 3 or 4 foot mark, you're going to be level because you're running into the existing slope there. And then you kind of calculate that box. So in my example here at the bottom, we're going to go up 4 inches at the foundation wall. We're adding about 4 feet out from the house. So our average for the whole area is going to be 2 inches. You want to, this is really key too, because sides of the houses are different as you go around. It's not going to all be the same. So you want to take measurements and really calculate each side. So the front of the house, this side, the back, the other side, and then add those areas together when you do your bulk order, if that's what you're going to do. One nice thing is places like Kalani Topsoil and some others have calculators right on their website where you can just plug in your information, your dimensions. So you can do that for each area, your length, your width, your depth. It calculates the cubic yards for that area. And then you can add that number to your next area you plug in to your next area for if you're doing that on 3 or 4 sides of the house, whatever it ends up being. And then you know your total order at that point. So it's super handy and not that tough to do. It's good to overestimate a little bit just to make sure that you have extra soil in case you're really compacting it well. So, most of the time it doesn't come out right on the number, right on the cubic yard. So if you're at like 1.78 cubic yards, get 2 cubic yards. You can get half cubic yards if you want. So if you're at, 1.3 something or 2.4, get 2.5. You don't need to get 3, but that's you can't really get the quarter yard in a bulk order, but you can get a half yard if you're kind of over a number, but not quite all the way. You don't want to go all the way up a whole nother yard of material for yourself. So doing these projects by hand, basically you need a lot of the tools we already have, but if you don't have some of these, you might need to get them or rent them like a tamper. So there's a flat or a spade shovel. You need probably both to get through the material easier. Garden rake, a tamper. Like I said, there are wood handled ones. There's 8-inch ones that are a little bit lighter, but they don't cover as much ground. There's 10-inch ones. There's also full metal ones. So I have the metal handle as well. They're all one piece. They've been welded together. Those are heavier than the wood handled ones, but they all work the same. And then you need at least one wheelbarrow. If you have more people, then you got a big family or something, people helping out, you can get a couple wheelbarrows going. It goes faster. Gardening or work gloves. If you have skin like me or hands like me, you better wear gardening or work gloves or you're going to get blisters pretty easily. And then grass seed covering material to cover up the grass seed. That's really important too, because if you don't cover your grass seed, it's going to you got to water it 4 times a day. Usually if you get some of those grass seed covering materials that you kind of roll out, there are some that are biodegradable. So after time, they'll start to break down. You don't need to necessarily remove them. Also, then you really only need to water your grass seed once a day. And then that helps keep the moisture in and help it germinate faster, take off faster. And that material, eventually you can just mow right over or it'll start to break down. Landscaping material, mulch or stone. If you're going to use stone, the thing with mulch is, quickly on mulch, you want to go at least 2 inches, between 2 to 3 inches of thickness when you put the mulch down. You don't want to be more than 3 inches or you're going to have too much moisture stuck in the mulch. It's actually going to mold within there and become an issue and break down faster. But if you're 2 to 3 inches, you'll get the maximum amount of weed blocking without having too much mulch that's going to retain moisture too much. If you get stone, then you want to have a good quality landscape fabric. You don't necessarily need to have, the super expensive industrial stuff. I don't think that stuff's needed, but if you get at least the mid-grade landscape fabric, that'll do a pretty good job blocking out weeds. Now, that's kind of in the normal situation. If we're going to do the retaining wall idea, then we need all the things on the previous slide, plus we need treated lumber, And again, measure out how much this is. Most of the time, you're only doing this on around parts of the house or a side, something like that, or there's across the back. You can use railroad ties. They are an alternative. They don't hold up as long as pressure treated lumber does. That's the other key part. Make sure that it is pressure treated green or ground contact lumber. They do sell treated lumber that is not ground contact for some reason, and that will break down quicker. The ground contact will pretty much last your lifetime, so then you don't have to worry about it at that point. You need a saw to cut that lumber with if you're going to do the retaining wall. Again, this is outside landscaping, retaining wall work. It's not finished carpentry, so we don't need the most precise cuts all the time. But so any saw will do, whether it's a miter saw, circ saw, circular saw, a chainsaw, people use those, or sawzall, whatever you want to use, whatever you have, use that, should be fine. The 6x6s are probably pretty tough to get through with most people's miter saws. But if you got a big one, it'll work. And then a circ saw, if you're going to cut the 6x6s, you just have to probably cut it on, on two sides to get through the whole piece, because most circ saws can't cut through that. But it'll do the job. If you're staking through, then you just need the drill bits, the sections of rebar, and then a sledgehammer or a mini sledge like we talked about. Sometimes, like in one of the pictures I showed earlier, there was a section where they had a corner that was put together. If you don't stake through, but you want to fasten the corners together to make those pieces tight, you can use what's a really nice screw, washer head lag screw. GRK fasteners or Spax are two brands that are really good. They say that you don't need to, and what you could do is just put two screws through the end, screwing one piece into the other. Just have to make sure they're long enough screws to get through your material and go into the other piece by, a couple inches. So probably about I think they sell them as 8-inch screws. That would be just fine. 7-inch maybe, but 8-inch is probably better. And then the other part with them, they say that you don't need to pre-drill first, but I would pre-drill. You've made the cuts, you've spent your money on this wood, you're trying to make this thing work. Do yourself a favor and pre-drill first, even though those screws say you don't have to. I still would. All right, here's where you find some materials for bulk buying. I mentioned Kalani Topsoil before. They're super easy to work with, great people, great company. There are other great ones too, Earthscapes, Madison Topsoil, Circle B. They're all wonderful companies. I've worked with them all. Great people. They provide good services, good quality product. There are other places out there. I'm not saying it has to be one of these, but these are ones I worked with and enjoy. They'll all deliver to your home, and most, I think, will deliver as little as 1 cubic yard to your house. Where you can find some of your materials as well in terms of shovels, rakes, tampers, wheelbarrows, most of those right at your local hardware store. Of course, you can go to the big box stores too. Wheelbarrows at hardware stores, though, most of the time, you can get them already pre-assembled and ready to rock. Otherwise, sometimes you get them from Menards or whatever, then you've got a box, you got a project, you got to put the wheelbarrow together before you can use it. Now, if you like doing that, great. To me, it's just another thing I got to do before I can get going on my projects. So I got my wheelbarrows from a hardware store. They're already put together, and I was happy about that. Gutter supplies, you can get them at most hardware stores. You just might need to call first. They might have to order some parts, but just because they don't always stock all this stuff doesn't mean they can't get them. So if you like your local hardware store and you have a good relationship with them, I'd encourage you to start there. But all the other places, big box places, sell them. There's one key strange thing though about some of what are the small screws that you screw pieces of downspout together if you're working on gutters, and where you might screw certain pieces of gutter together or end caps, things like that. For some reason, at Menards, they don't always sell magnetized gutter screws. The reason that's an issue is because if you think of it this way, you're up on a ladder, you're trying to put this happened to me, this is a real life experience. So I was up on a ladder trying to connect the downspout to the gutter where it came through, and I had my screw gun in my right hand. I had a magnetized bit. I put the screw in the bit, and then I had to hold the downspout up with my other hand, and then I went to screw it into the downspout or through the downspout into the gutter, And as soon as I put pressure on it, it fell out because it wasn't a magnetized screw and went and landed on the ground 15 feet below me. So I got my second screw out, same thing. Third screw out, same thing. So then I had to be really careful with how, and it took way longer than it should have. So if you make sure that if you're going to get zip screws to connect pieces of downspout and gutter together and end caps, make sure you get the magnetized zip screws. Ask them, are these magnetized screws? If they're not, don't buy them. You're just buying frustration. If they are magnetized screws, it'll sit in your screw because you don't have 3 arms. Remember how many times we could use like 3 hands on a bunch of these projects, but we don't. So when you just have 2, you need magnetized gutter screw. Okay, here's a quick tip. Learn from my frustrating experience. Okay, some general estimated cost ideas. There are some ranges here because a lot of times it depends on the amount ordered, but shredded topsoil in bulk can be somewhere, I've seen it as little as $35 a yard, as much as $65. It might be a little more than that now per yard, depending. It also depends. The more you order, the less per yard because they've got to make that truck delivery from wherever they're coming from as well. So that's why it's a little more expensive when you get less material. Madison wash stone number 2. Is the stone that I prefer to go with. River rock is a little more expensive. The main difference between the two, once they're all cleaned up and washed from some rains, is that river rock has a little bit more dark tones in it. But other than that, and a little bit more variation. But other than that, all the pictures I showed you before, that was all Madison wash stone number 2, and it's substantially cheaper than river rock. Mulch is somewhere around $40 to $60 a yard. You can get a really expensive wheelbarrow for like $100, or you can get a cheap one for $35, but somewhere around $50 or so is a good wheelbarrow that you might want to go with. Shovels and rakes, ranges between $10 to $30, depending on what type of handle and comfort handle, stuff like that you want to have on there. I do prefer a little bit more expensive shovel because I think they work better, they're easier to handle, they hold up better. So you might want to spend the extra dollars there. Soil tampers. Again, you can rent them from hardware stores and places, but to buy one is somewhere between like $25, $35. The weird thing, I came up with some weird things in these pricing about treated lumber. This is something to know, whether this impacts how your project is going if you're going on the retaining wall idea. 4x6 pieces of treated lumber actually are cheapest per foot in 10-foot lengths, and 6x6s are cheapest in 8-foot lengths. So you can use that however you like or not. I just thought it was an interesting thing that I discovered when I was pricing up some of this stuff. 2-foot pieces of rebar, pretty cheap. Drill bit, just make sure you get the length you need. That's only for that staking option if you're going to do it. But again, most of the time, not necessary. Okay, so gutter supplies. This is a list of gutter supplies and their costs, just so you can price that up. Again, the speed screw hanger, the downspouts. Outlets are the things that go on the end, the outlets are the pieces that you can buy that go through the gutter that you attach the downspout to. The end caps go on the ends that help block the edge of the gutter. Elbows are, you need a few of those to bend the system back to the house so you can connect it and anchor the downspout in and then run it down and then have an elbow on the bottom to, again, feed the water out that you put your extension on. So you need 3 elbows generally per downspout. And then zip screws, magnetized, please. And then pipe bands are the things that wrap around your downspout that you can attach to the house. And then you need a tube of gutter sealant to just kind of seal up a lot of anywhere there's a hole or an end cap, you want to seal that with gutter sealant. Very, very important, before you dig, call Digger's Hotline, please, please, please. It's a free service. You can get a Digger's Hotline ticket online as well if you prefer to do it that way. Pretty easy. Just remember this. Once you have the markings, they're only legal for 10 calendar days. So when they come to mark the property, you don't want to call them too early before you're actually going to do this. But you don't want to call them, the day before, because they might not be able to get to your property in time. So, plan accordingly, but remember those markings are only technically good for 10 calendar days. If you've gone well beyond that for one reason or another, you should call and have them come and mark again. They will do that. So just remember that. 811 few quick notes. The quality of the topsoil matters. Grass seed grows better and there are fewer weeds if you have the good quality topsoil. In those places I referenced, that's what they'll sell you. Shredded topsoil, not clumpy, difficult to deal with, weedy topsoil. So the shredded topsoil is worth it. It's a lot easier to work with, and you don't have the weeds so bad. If you're planting grass seed, again, cover it. You only have to water it once a day. Extra hands make it go easier. If you don't want to take this on yourself, here are some wonderful landscaping companies that I've worked with and would highly recommend. There are plenty other good landscaping companies in the area, but these are just some that I know the owners and feel really good about. And then there are a couple of gutter companies here too. Now, there are a number of companies that also do gutters, but they're remodeling companies that are, they do windows, they do roofs, they do other things like that, siding. They're very, very busy. And so it might be harder to get them to come for just a gutter project at this point. But these are gutter companies. That's what they do. So that's why I give you these two right here. Thank you so much. This is our information. That is everything I had to share with you tonight. I made it within the hour. I'm glad about that. And do you have any other questions? Please fire away or throw them in the chat. Otherwise, I will let you go in just a little bit. Katie says also good to note that Digger's Hotline only marks lines from the utility to your house, not private lines. That is correct. Yes. They will only mark those utility lines. And then now that's the other key point about Diggers is that they'll ask you questions like, where are you going to be working? And you can always, if you're not sure about how to answer some of these questions, just ask them to mark the whole property. They'll mark the whole property, then that's fine. Because they'll go through and, you can do a target. If you're only working in the backyard, you can say only in the backyard. But if you think you might be working around, just say, please mark the whole property, and that's fine. But thanks for pointing that out, Katie. Yes. Other lines, if you have a new internet line or something like that, anything else like that, shallow gas line. She had found that there was a shallow gas line from the previous owner. Yikes. That's scary. Sorry to hear that. Let's see. Do we have any insights to share about hydrostatic pressure leading to water in the basement? There are a lot of tricky situations with water. The biggest one that's hard for us to deal with are places where there's high water tables. So if you have a high water table and the ground below the foundation or the basement floor is actually seeping water up, that's really tough. If you do these practices, it actually helps minimize the amount of water that gets to the ground directly below, but it's still something that's hard to come across. Now, if you have holes in the basement wall that you want to try to patch, there are some different products out there because the water pressure, if it gets to the foundation wall, is pretty substantive. Water finds any place it can to seep through, which is also why it's really difficult when you find water come in one point of your house to say, oh, the leak is directly above that. A lot of times that's not the case. A lot of times the water ran, this way and that way and several feet over and then found a spot it could come in. So that's why looking around the outside of your house is really important. Another reason for that, for us trying to get you to address this on the outside and not the inside, is because then we're preventing the water from getting there in the first place. Now, if we can't do that and we do have an issue with it, or we've got, things to try to patch on the inside, we also can protect ourselves both ways. That's fine. You can patch cracks and holes on the inside, and you can also do the outside work. But what happens is there are a lot of products that fail those tests when they've actually been tested. To hold up against water pressure. A lot of these basement sealer products do not hold up very well. There was, the basement paint doesn't have a lot of resistance. Concrete crack filler does pretty well. You can buy tubes of it, but it comes out, once it dries, it's really rough. So you almost have a way, it's difficult to paint over that once you have it in place. There are some great companies like Xander Basement Solutions and others that use some new products that seem to be working very well. But a lot of those products, I don't know that there's a good version available for it in the regular market to homeowners. It seems like the pros have mostly, those products. So you might need to call Xander. If you're having a serious issue, I will call a company like Xander to see and have them evaluate your basement and see if they can seal stuff up. Because if you're getting a lot of pressure and water coming through the foundation, causing even bowing of the foundation wall, thing like that, there's a lot going on there that needs to be addressed. Probably a landscaper and a basement specialist company. That's what I'd advise. Sorry for the long answer. I was trying to cover everything there. Anything else? If not, I say thank you to all of you. I encourage you to utilize the awesome weather this weekend to at least check around your yard and see if you have any trouble spots. If you do, look into some of those resources. I know the landscaping company has been very busy. So, and then also, of course, the suppliers have been very busy too. It was like a week before I could get my soil when I ordered it this last month. So, if you've got things like that and you want to do a project, it might not be instantaneous. You can buy bags from a place if you want. It's a lot harder to deal with. Plus, the moisture in those bags makes it all clumpy. You get that delivered fresh shredded topsoil to work with. That's much easier than trying to work with clumpy bags. So I'd advise going the bulk route if you can. And it's cheaper as well. Let's see. One more question. Relates to coming up from the ground through the floor, not the wall. Yes. So the high water table coming up through the ground, you can seal those cracks. Concrete crack filler is good. There's also there's epoxy based. If you find an epoxy based sealant, there is one that's newer that's been used in basements more. I think it's available for sale at Menards or whatever, but an epoxy based sealant, that is one I would try. They're very smelly and you gotta have good ventilation to use it, but that is one I would try on floors and on walls. The other part is if you treat the outside, like I said, you can at least reduce a little bit the amount of water that's getting to the ground right below your house because you're getting the proper mitigation. So here's the way to look at that and think about it is if you're getting the water to run far enough away and then it's following the proper drainage plan and getting out to the street, then it's not actually saturating in the ground and soil around your house, which then increases the water table around your house. So that's why doing this stuff, even though it's not directly related to that water coming up under the ground, it can help. It can help, and it's worth the time, and the amount it costs is not that much, so it's worth the dollars spent as well. All right. Let's see. Do we have anybody else? I think I got you. All right. Thank you all. If there's anybody else here that has any questions, you can also email me, outreach@projecthomewi.org. outreach@projecthomewi.org. Thanks so much for checking out our first virtual class. I was really happy that ED Lock Public Library would do this for us and the Village of McFarland would do this for us. We really appreciate that. And we appreciate our sponsors and we appreciate you being good, thoughtful homeowners and wanting to take care of your property. And again, I'm telling you, these practices that we talked about, I know it seems, okay, maybe this is too simple. Why did I sit through this hour? Because you didn't tell me anything revolutionary, Jason. I get it. But these are simple practices that if you understand how to do it, understand what you're doing and do it the right way, can go a long way to protect you from ever having water issues in your house. And that right there is golden. So really encourage you to kind of take the information, run with it, share it with other people too. If you know neighbors that are having water problems, share the slides when you get them and share the information. Maybe lend them a hand if you can too. I know these times are a little weird. If you don't feel comfortable with that, I get it. But if we can maintain our distancing or wear a mask while we're doing it, all that sort of good stuff, we can still help our neighbors with this stuff too. Okay, I'm done talking unless anybody wants me to talk anymore. You probably don't. And And Stephanie, anything before we close up shop here?
I don't have anything other than to say thank you so much for doing this presentation, and thanks everyone for coming.
So Anne, are you, you're just going to directly email out the handout I sent you to everybody?
I am. I will be
Okay,
sending that just a few moments after we end here.
perfect. Okay. Thank you all. Thanks to Anne and Stephanie, the Village of McFarland, and ED Lock Public Library. Jason from Project Home. Again, if you have direct questions for me, you can email us at info@projecthomewi.org or my direct email outreach at projecthomewi.org. Thank you all so much.